that narrative, that history cannot just be written out of what the gentleman said. And it doesn't mean that what happened to the Jews in Europe was horrific, but there's a problem there, and there's a fundamental clash between two rights or two claims to the same land. And I think it's just worth remembering that. Thank you.
Do you have a response from this side?
Just a point to build on the discussion maybe as well is I agree absolutely that I think the right frame in which to think about this, I think Dave's mentioned it, I think the last speaker did as well, is two traumatized peoples. That really what we're dealing with is two traumatized peoples struggling to see each other plain, to trust each other, and to bring their populations with them into a deal to share, which is actually a very small piece of land. And that leads me on to the point I want to make, which is in defense of negotiations. I worry sometimes that there's an emerging consensus there, and we heard it at the beginning in the introductory remarks, negotiations are hopeless, we've had 20 years of negotiations, we've got nowhere, etc. Just hold on, let's just go back 20 years, think where we actually were, and think where we actually are now. If you look at the process of Camp David, you look at enormous concessions being made by Barak, and Arafat not actually coming back with a counter-offer. Not that he disagreed with a particular aspect of what Barak was proposing, but there was literally no counter-offer. You then go through the Clinton parameters, and you go on to the Olmert offer, which I read out at the beginning at Annapolis, and my challenge to you in part would be Olmert plus what? If you don't think Olmert was worth accepting, or even engaging with by Abbas, Olmert plus what? What, other than the things I read out at the beginning, do you think Israel should be offering? And in terms of replying to the guy's question back there about is Israel making any moves at all, Israel has basically given up the hope of Greater Israel. It has given up Judea and Samaria. 60 to 70% of Israelis are absolutely clear that when the deal is there to be struck, they're ready to strike the deal. That strikes me as part of the product of negotiations. The other product of negotiations is the creation through the Oslo process of Palestinian state building. Salam Fayyad has transformed the West Bank. I was in Ramallah, and it does look like a building site. The joke is there is a problem about where do you park the 4x4 and so on. Young, savvy activists, with their laptops, engaging in a tremendous program of nation building, new economic institutions, new roads, new hospitals, new kinds of trade arrangements. The World Bank and the IMF saying this is tremendous progress. That as well is also a product of moving away from the Second Intifada, moving away from violence. Cooperation with America and cooperation with Israel has been central to Fayyadism, which is his nation-building project, and that's not to be taken lightly at all. It's the bedrock of a future Palestinian state being created over the last period as a result of negotiations. So don't give up on negotiations. The parties will have to make compromises, but there's every reason to think it's possible that they can achieve them.
Thank you. Do we have a response from Jeff?
From the language of the other side this evening, you would imagine that all you really need to fix the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a shrink and a sofa, because there's so much talk about angst and trauma and no reflection of the realities on the ground, as I've been emphasising. Now, there was a lot of time wasted reading out a lot of things about the situation of Palestinian citizens inside Israel, because when people talk about apartheid, nobody is talking exclusively about what's happening inside the pre-67 borders. Some people are talking about what's happening in the West Bank, and others like myself are talking about it in the context of looking at it as a single territorial unit that has one regime, the Israeli regime, that controls the people and affords different rights to those groups of people and denies them to others. And it's not so easy to make that line between what happens in the West Bank and in Israel. So just to give you an example here, this is from Human Rights Watch. Okay, they're talking about, International Human Rights Watch are talking about the settlements in the West Bank, which they describe as a two-tier system for the two populations of the West Bank. While Israeli settlements flourish, Palestinians live not just separate, not just unequal, but sometimes even pushed off their lands and out of their homes. Those are Human Rights Watch's words, using very emotive language there. and also Human Rights Watch about what's happening in the Negev and Nakab in the south of Israel. So this is inside Israel, inside the pre-67 borders. Quote, Israel employs systematically discriminatory policies in the Negev, tearing down historic Bedouin villages and handing out Bedouin land to allow Jewish farmers to set up ranches, end quote. Okay, so the same logic is at work in the West Bank and inside the pre-67 borders. The same logic of dispossession of one group of people in order to benefit another group of people. Just today, for example, it was reported that the chair of the World Zionist Organization, which is a body that is a kind of para-state body that has an official role in the kind of constitutional framework of the Israeli state, and it doesn't have a specific constitution, but it has an official role there. The chair of that body was in the UK recently, and what he asked for more Jews to move to Israel. Why? Because the number of Arabs is going up too much. Okay? The same, you can read it today in the Jewish Chronicle, which always reports the truth, so you don't have to take my word for it. And anyway, so this same logic is at work that we would recognise here in the UK. I mean, it was rightly pointed out that people who came from other countries to Leicester were, they had problems, and they still do, but they were received here. And if a group emerged, like they exist, that said, oh, that group, there's too many of the wrong kind of person in Leicester, we would know where to place them on the map, politically speaking. But that ideology isn't from a fringe party in Israel. It's written through state policies since 1948 through to today, that says there's one group of people that should have certain rights and another group of people that shouldn't. And just really quickly, finally, on the separation wall. Separation wall, which the International Court of Justice said in their advisory opinion, by almost unanimous verdict, only one judge dissented, that it's illegal under international law. I imagine other people in this room have seen what happens when the separation wall cuts through people's houses, cuts through people's olive trees, cuts through people's land, separates Palestinian farmers from their livelihood. And the route of the wall is explicitly designed to make sure that illegal colonies are included on the so-called Israeli side. Now, for a side that talks a lot about peace and negotiations, it's funny that such a basic denial of international law and international legal principles should be kind of whitewashed in this way. Thanks very much.
We managed to fit in quite a bit, so I'll respond to aspects of it. The reason why you need to focus on negotiation and why you need to focus on peace is because these issues suddenly don't become issues. Personally, I have issues with settlements. I have issues with settlement expansion and what entails along with it. It doesn't sit very well with me. However, if we look at the settlements themselves, 80% when polled said that they would leave if it meant that there would be a peace deal. When we look at the Olmert offer of 2008, what it meant was that 94% of the West Bank would be part of the new state Palestine with land swaps for the remaining 6%. What that meant was that 75% of the settlers would remain in part of Israel as part of their new final borders. And that's why it's important to focus on peace, and that's why it's important to focus on negotiation. Israel is not perfect, and we cannot try and pretend that it is. We can't sit here and say that Israel's whiter than white, because it's not. But to portray it as some kind of unbelievable evil that has only ever adopted racist policies, not only is it flawed, it's unbelievably damaging. It's damaging to the future hope of peace. It's damaging for achieving that which can resolve all of those issues. And that's why it's important to focus on negotiations. That's why the question is targeted at peace, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
Okay, do we have a response yet?
Very, very briefly, because a lot's been said on that. I think we should I don't think the Leicester parallel actually works, really. Frankly, I'll leave Leicester out of it.
Why, Jeremy?
Well, because I don't think it's an appropriate parallel, and I don't think it's sensible to bring it in. In 1948, when the State of Israel was established, 700,000 Palestinians were driven out. And if you look at any pre-1948 maps of the whole of Mandate Palestine, you will find that in every town, in every village, there were Jewish people, there were Islamic people, there were Christian people, there was a whole variety of people. The census is quite clearly there to show it. Those that were driven out ended up, for the most part, in Gaza or in Jordan or in Lebanon or in Syria and so on. The narrative goes on. And I think one has to recognise the feelings of the diaspora, particularly those in the refugee camps in the neighbouring countries. Secondly, on the question of expulsions of people, my last visit I went to the Negev and I met Bedouin people, including a member of the Knesset in that area, and I went to a number of communities that had been de-recognised by the State of Israel and the buildings demolished and the Bedouin people forced to live in what can best be described as a series of concrete barracks somewhere, and every time they tried to build a mosque, the Israeli Defence Force came and knocked it down, so they started building it up again. That is hardly a sensible or any kind of recognised approach for doing things. I think you have to recognise that. The other point, which we do go on about a great deal, and I think we should go on about a great deal, I'm glad for some recognition of the problem of settlements on the West Bank. If you're a Palestinian farmer and you cannot get access to your land, clearly you can't cultivate. If you are an olive grower and your olive trees are cut down, clearly you don't get any olives. And if you want to take water from a well and the well is removed from you, you haven't got any water. And then you see, next door to where you are, a settlement with a wall around it and the army defending it and people living a much higher standard and protected by the Israeli army, people get angry. I'm not justifying violence, I'm not justifying what goes on, I'm just saying that if you behave in that kind of way and have a state policy of expansion through settlements, then how on earth can you expect the other side to think you're negotiating in a fair and reasonable way? Take what's happening in East Jerusalem, the way the people have been expelled from Silwan, their houses being demolished, in order to create the city of David in what was a wholly Palestinian area of East Jerusalem. That is expansion in a brutal way. I went to see one family in another part of Jerusalem whose house had been occupied by a group of settlers, and they were living in a tent in the garden of their own house. And I attempted to talk to these settlers, who had been very abusive and very unpleasant to 3 elderly Palestinian women. And they just stared at me and refused to answer. It wasn't a language problem either. Refused to answer, refused to speak, refused to do anything, except to say, it's our land. And imagine the feeling of that family. Imagine the feeling of the wider connection of that family when that happens to one family. That is a state-sponsored expansion by the State of Israel. To bring about peace, there's got to be a halt, absolutely, and a withdrawal of the settlements. That would be a big step forward, and so far there's absolutely no signs of that happening whatsoever.
Let's talk about 1948. So, what we're talking about at the end of there's a whole series of sort of empires going on, right? Well, following the First World War, we have the end of the Ottoman and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Following the Second World War, we have decolonisation across the Middle East and a large part of Africa. Following 1989, we have decolonisation of the Soviet Empire, right? And the force which usually defeats colonialism is nationalism. And what has happened in a lot of these cases across the globe is that nationalist movements which have attempted to expel colonial forces have been successful, have done so, and have then gone on to consolidate some kind of national state. And that was happening all across the Middle East in 1948. You had the consolidation, one after another, the throwing out of the colonial powers. You had these great cosmopolitan cities all across the Middle East, not just Jerusalem, but the ones I listed earlier on, where people lived side by side, not in peace, not in democracy, but under colonial powers. And the colonists were expelled across the Middle East, across India and the subcontinent, and nationalist movements expelled them, and very often they set about trying then to create some idea of the nation state they were going to build. And all over the Middle East were built Arab states, Arab Muslim states. And all over India and Pakistan, the civic nationalism